Welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories, or I will come for you. I'd like to thank Sean Keller and Doug Ohl for joining the Curator's Disciples. Your viewership is very much appreciated. If anyone would like early access to my latest stories and an ad-free listening experience, consider becoming one of the Curator's Disciples. The link is in the description below. Today's dark web story is based on true events. While the killings in the story do not represent what happened in reality, the plot of this story is entirely true. Let's hope you can make it to the end of this tale. Story number 1. The Phantom Manifesto. By the Curator. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, a place where everyone knew everyone else. My father was a police officer, and my mother was a school teacher. They were good, honest people who taught me the importance of justice and integrity from a young age. I was an only child, and my parents doted on me, always encouraging my curiosity and independence. From as far back as I can remember, I was fascinated by stories. I devoured books, and when I wasn't reading, I was writing my own tales of adventure and mystery. My favorite pastime was listening to my father's stories from the police force. He never sugar-coated the harsh realities of his job, and I admired his bravery and dedication. It was no surprise to anyone when I decided to pursue a career in journalism. I attended a state university, majoring in journalism and minoring in criminal justice. My college years were a whirlwind of late-night study sessions, internships, and campus activism. I was passionate about uncovering the truth and making a difference in the world. During my senior year, I landed an internship at a local newspaper, where I covered everything from city council meetings to crime reports. After graduation, I moved to the city, determined to make a name for myself. I started working for a small independent newspaper, where I quickly earned a reputation for my tenacity and fearless reporting. My big break came when I exposed a corruption scandal involving several high-ranking city officials. The story catapulted me into the spotlight, and I was offered a position at one of the city's top newspapers. In my new role, I continued to tackle tough stories, delving into organized crime, political corruption, and human rights abuses. My work was often dangerous, and I received my fair share of threats, but I never backed down. I believed in the power of journalism to hold the powerful accountable and bring justice to the voiceless. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I received an anonymous tip. The message was cryptic but intriguing. Look into the Phantom Butcher. The truth is on the dark web. I had heard of the Phantom Butcher before. He was an infamous and unidentified serial killer who had terrorized the city for years. His victims were diverse, and his methods were brutal. Despite the police's best efforts, he had always managed to slip through their fingers. I decided to follow the lead, no matter how dangerous it seemed. Navigating the dark web isn't for the faint of heart, but I've had my fair share of experiences. Using my skills and contacts, I carefully made my way through encrypted forums and hidden sites. It took days, but I finally found what I was looking for. A heavily encrypted forum known for housing dark secrets. And there it was, a hidden transcript detailing the actions of the Phantom Butcher. The transcript was a horrifying document, written in the first person, presumably by the killer himself. It was meticulously detailed, describing each murder from the initial stalking to the final act. The level of detail was sickening. The transcript listed the victims' names, ages, and backgrounds, indicating that the killer selected them based on specific criteria. This is a page of the transcript, without word of a lie. This is verbatim. Victim 1, Lisa Montgomery, January 12, 2023. I first noticed Lisa Montgomery during one of my late-night walks. She was a nurse, often working the graveyard shift at the hospital. Her tired eyes and routine made her an easy target. She was always alone, always predictable. I watched her for weeks, learning her schedule. She would leave the hospital at 11 p.m., walk to the nearby bus stop, and take the same bus home. She never deviated from her routine. One cold night, I decided it was time. I followed her from the hospital, keeping a safe distance. She didn't notice me, her attention absorbed by her phone as she waited for the bus. I boarded the same bus, sitting several rows behind her, watching. She got off at her usual stop, and I trailed her silently. Her apartment building was quiet, most of the tenants already asleep. I waited in the shadows as she fumbled with her keys at the entrance. As she unlocked the door, I made my move. I grabbed her from behind, clamping a chloroform-soaked rag over her mouth. She struggled, her eyes wide with terror, but the chloroform worked quickly. Her body went limp in my arms. I carried her inside, making sure to lock the door behind me. Her apartment was small and tidy, a reflection of her orderly life. I laid her on the living room floor, securing her wrists and ankles with duct tape. She began to stir, her eyes fluttering open. I slapped her hard across the face, waking her up fully. Her screams were muffled by the gag I shoved into her mouth. I took my time, savoring the fear in her eyes. I made small cuts on her arms and legs with a scalpel, each incision precise and deliberate. Blood trickled down her pale skin, pooling on the carpet. Next, I used pliers to remove her fingernails, one by one. Each nail was a new symphony of agony. Her muffled cries were like music to my ears. I watched her eyes fill with tears, her body convulsing in pain. For the final act, I chose the piano wire. I wrapped it around her neck, slowly tightening it. Her eyes bulged, her face turning red as she struggled to breathe. I leaned in close, whispering in her ear, "It's almost over, Lisa." Her body went still, the life draining from her eyes. I held the wire tight for a few more seconds, ensuring she was truly gone. Then, I meticulously cleaned the scene, leaving no trace of my presence. Her lifeless body was left as a testament to my power and control. Victim 2, George Wilkins. March 5, 2023. George Wilkins was an easy target. An elderly man living alone in a small house on the outskirts of the city. No family, no friends, perfect. I watched him for days, learning his daily routines. He would take his medications at 8 a.m., go for a short walk around the neighborhood, and spend the rest of his day watching old TV shows. One night, I broke into his house through a back window. The house was dark and silent, the old man already asleep. I moved through the rooms like a shadow, finally reaching his bedroom. George was asleep when I struck. I used a crowbar to deliver a crushing blow to his head. He woke up, disoriented and bleeding, but I didn't give him a chance to react. I tied him to the bedposts, making sure the knots were tight. He begged for his life, his voice trembling with fear. I ignored his pleas, focusing on the task at hand. I took my time with George. I used a knife to carve patterns into his chest and abdomen. Blood oozed from the wounds, staining the sheets. His screams filled the room, but I was relentless. Next, I used a hammer to break his fingers and toes, one by one. The sound of breaking bones was satisfying. George's screams grew weaker with each blow, his body convulsing in pain. For George's final moments, I chose suffocation. I placed a plastic bag over his head, securing it with duct tape around his neck. His hands clawed at the bag, but it was futile. I watched, fascinated, as his movements slowed and finally stopped. I left the house as silently as I had entered, leaving no trace of my presence. Victim 3, Emily Sanders. May 20, 2023. Emily Sanders was different. Young, beautiful, full of life. She reminded me of someone from my past. I knew she had to be next. I followed her from the college campus to her apartment, taking note of her schedule. She was always busy, always surrounded by friends, but I knew she had late-night study sessions, alone. One night, as she walked home from a late study session, I made my move. I parked my van in a secluded spot, waiting for her to pass by. When she did, I jumped out, grabbing her and forcing her into the back of the van. I restrained Emily to a makeshift table in the back of the van. Her eyes were wide with fear, her body trembling. I took my time. I started by burning her with a blowtorch, watching as her skin blistered and peeled. Her screams were like music to my ears. I then moved on to waterboarding, pouring water over her face as she struggled to breathe. For Emily, I chose strangulation. I used my hands, wrapping them around her throat and squeezing. Her pulse slowed under my grip, the light fading from her eyes. I watched as her body went limp, the life draining from her. The transcript ended with a chilling note. They never saw me coming. They never stood a chance. Smiley face. The level of detail in the transcript was horrifying. The killer described his motivations with chilling clarity, revealing a twisted mind with a complete lack of remorse. He talked about the thrill of the hunt, the power he felt as he controlled his victims' lives and deaths. It was clear he enjoyed the power and control he had over his victims. I became obsessed with the transcript. I couldn't stop thinking about it, piecing together the information to uncover the killer's identity. I cross-referenced the details with unsolved murder cases, finding eerie similarities. The more I dug, the more convinced I became that this was the real deal. I started spending all my free time analyzing the transcript, creating a timeline of the murders and mapping out the locations. It was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, each piece bringing me closer to the full picture. I noticed patterns in the killer's behavior, how he chose his victims, the methods he used, and the meticulous planning that went in each murder. It was clear he was intelligent and methodical, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. As I got closer to the truth, strange things started happening. I began receiving threatening messages. They were vague at first, just a few words telling me to stop what I was doing. But as I ignored them and continued my investigation, the threats became more explicit. My computer was hacked, and my phone was tapped. I felt like I was constantly being watched. It was terrifying, but I couldn't back down now. I knew I needed help, so I reluctantly involved a trusted police detective, Mark Jensen. He had been working on the Phantom Butcher case for years, without success. Mark was a seasoned detective, known for his dedication and thoroughness. He had a calm, methodical approach to his work, and he quickly became my ally in this dangerous endeavor. Together, we started to piece together the puzzle. We spent long hours in his office, going over the evidence and brainstorming ideas. Mark was skeptical at first, but as we dug deeper, he became convinced that we were on the right track. We found connections between the murders detailed in the transcript and several cold cases, each one fitting the killer's modus operandi perfectly. After weeks of piecing together the horrifying details from the transcript, I felt a breakthrough was imminent. Mark and I had spent countless hours in the police precinct's cold, dimly lit archives, cross-referencing the transcript with unsolved murder cases. We pored over police reports, forensic analyses, and crime scene photos, searching for patterns that would link the murders. One night, as the clock struck midnight, Mark's eyes lit up. He had found a case with striking similarities to the transcript's descriptions. It was the murder of Lisa Montgomery, a nurse who had been found dead in her apartment 2 years prior. The details were eerily similar: the precise cuts, the methodical removal of fingernails, and the use of piano wire. We had our first solid lead. We delved deeper into the lives of the victims, looking for any connections. What we found was a loose thread, but it was enough to pull. A reclusive individual named Vincent Blackwood had been mentioned in several witness statements. He was described as quiet, reserved, and often seen in the vicinity of the victims before their deaths. Vincent Blackwood lived in a secluded cabin on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. His reclusiveness made him a perfect suspect. We needed to approach this carefully, ensuring we had enough evidence to confront him. Armed with the knowledge from the transcript and the link to Vincent Blackwood, Mark and I drove to his cabin. The drive was tense, the silence between us filled with unspoken fears. Vincent's cabin was nestled deep within a dense forest, the path leading to it overgrown and barely visible. It was the perfect place for someone who didn't want to be found. We parked a distance away and approached on foot. The cabin was dark, its windows shuttered. As we got closer, my heart pounded in my chest. Mark signaled for me to stay behind him as he knocked on the door. There was no answer. We circled the cabin, looking for a way in. Finally, we found an unlocked window and climbed inside. The interior was as dark and eerie as the exterior, filled with the stale scent of decay. My flashlight beam revealed a meticulously clean space, with everything in its place. Too perfect, too controlled. We found Vincent in the basement, sitting in a makeshift office. He didn't seem surprised to see us. He greeted us with a calm demeanor, his eyes cold and calculating. We questioned him about the murders, but he denied everything, providing an alibi that seemed suspiciously rehearsed. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to keep digging. Mark warned me to leave it to the police, but I couldn't let it go. I returned to the precinct, sifting through the evidence once more, looking for anything we might have missed. Late one night, as I was about to give up, I found it, a hidden part of the transcript that hadn't been encrypted. It detailed the killer's latest planned victim, me. My blood ran cold as I read the chilling words, realizing I was his next target. Realizing the danger I was in, I immediately contacted Mark. We set up a plan to trap Vincent. My apartment became a surveillance hub with cameras and microphones hidden in every corner. Mark and his team were stationed nearby, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. I tried to go about my daily routine, but the knowledge of being watched weighed heavily on me. Every creak, every shadow sent shivers down my spine. I knew Vincent was out there, waiting for the right moment. The night came sooner than expected. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to work, when I heard a faint noise from the kitchen. My heart raced as I saw a shadow move. Vincent was inside. I pressed the panic button under my desk, alerting Mark and his team. Vincent moved swiftly, his eyes filled with malevolent glee. He lunged at me, but I fought back with all my strength. We struggled, his hands tightening around my throat. The room spun, my vision blurring. Just as I felt myself losing consciousness, Mark and his team burst through the door. They tackled Vincent, pulling him off me. He fought viciously, but they subdued him, handcuffing him and dragging him away. During his interrogation, Vincent showed no remorse. He confessed to everything, detailing his gruesome crimes with chilling detachment. He even claimed to have more hidden transcripts, detailing other unsolved murders. The police found the transcripts hidden in his basement, each one more disgusting and disturbing than the last. So, to anyone out there who thinks they can hide in the shadows, remember this: there's always someone watching, always someone willing to shine a light. And to Vincent Blackwood, if you're listening from your cell, here's a final thought. Looks like you were right about one thing. The devil really is in the details. But this time, it was your downfall. Story number 2. Welcome to the Voss residence. By the Curator. The Voss family was the epitome of suburban perfection. Gideon Voss, the patriarch, was a man of many talents. In his early 40s, Gideon worked as an IT specialist for a prestigious tech firm. His colleagues respected him for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to solve the most complex problems. Outside of work, Gideon was known for his charm and charisma. He was always ready with a joke or a kind word, making him a favorite among neighbors and friends. Gideon's wife, Serafina, was the ideal stay-at-home mom. She had met Gideon in college, where she was studying art history. Though she never pursued a career in the field, her passion for art never waned. Their home was decorated with her own paintings and carefully curated art pieces. Serafina was involved in every aspect of their children's lives. From school meetings to organizing charity events, she was the embodiment of grace and kindness, always willing to lend a helping hand. Their children, Ophelia and Damien, were equally impressive. Ophelia, 17, was a high school senior with dreams of becoming a doctor. She excelled in her studies, was a member of the debate team, and volunteered at the local hospital. Ophelia was known for her bright smile and compassionate nature, making her popular among her peers. Damien, 15, was a sophomore who loved playing soccer. He was the star player on his school team and dreamed of going professional. Like his sister, Damien was well-liked and known for his sportsmanship and dedication. The Voss family lived in a beautiful 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The lawn was always perfectly manicured, the garden filled with blooming flowers. The family hosted barbecues in the summer and festive parties during the holidays. To anyone looking from the outside, they were the picture-perfect family living the American dream. But behind the Voss family's perfect facade lay a dark and twisted secret. It all started years ago when Gideon discovered the dark web. Initially, it was a curiosity, a way to explore the hidden corners of the internet. But the anonymity and freedom it offered soon became an obsession. Gideon found himself drawn to the darker aspects of the web, exploring forums and chat rooms where illegal activities were discussed openly. Gideon's fascination with the dark web grew over time. He began participating in illegal transactions, using his tech skills to remain undetected. The thrill of it excited him in a way nothing else did. He started to involve his family, gradually exposing them to his dark world. Serafina, initially horrified, was eventually drawn in by Gideon's charismatic persuasion. She began to see it as a thrilling adventure, a way to break the monotony of suburban life. Ophelia and Damien were brought into the fold as they grew older. Gideon and Serafina introduced them to the dark web, showing them how to navigate its treacherous waters. The children, eager to please their parents and excited by the forbidden nature of it all, quickly adapted. They became a tight-knit unit, each playing a role in their dark web activities. The Voss family started hunting people on the dark web, selecting victims who wouldn't be easily missed. They posed as buyers in illegal transactions or offered large sums of money for illicit services to lure their prey. The thrill of the hunt brought them closer together, creating a bond forged in darkness and secrecy. Their latest target was a young man named Felix. Desperate for money, Felix agreed to meet the Voss family, believing he was making a lucrative deal. Little did he know, he was walking into a trap. I'll never forget the day it all started. I was Felix's neighbor and friend. We often hung out together, sharing beers and playing video games. Felix was always looking for ways to make extra cash. When he told me about the deal he found online, I had a bad feeling, but Felix was confident, saying it was too good to pass up. On the day of the meeting, Felix dressed in his best clothes and drove to the Voss family's home. He said he'd be back in a few hours. But as the hours turned into days, I knew something was wrong. Felix never returned, and his phone went straight to voicemail. I reported him missing to the police, but they didn't seem too concerned. After all, Felix had a history of disappearing for a few days when he was in trouble or chasing a new scheme. When Felix arrived at the Voss household, he was greeted by Serafina. Her warm smile and motherly demeanor put him at ease. The house was as immaculate inside as it was outside, filled with tasteful decor and family photos that radiated a sense of normalcy. Serafina led Felix to the living room where Gideon and their children, Ophelia and Damien, were waiting. Felix felt slightly nervous but brushed it off as pre-deal jitters. Gideon offered Felix a drink, which he accepted without hesitation. The family engaged him in friendly conversation, asking about his life and ambitions. Felix found himself relaxing, charmed by their hospitality. As the minutes passed, Felix began to feel dizzy and lightheaded. He tried to stand but stumbled, the room spinning around him. His vision blurred, and before he could comprehend what was happening, he lost consciousness. When Felix awoke, he was in the basement. The room was dimly lit, with concrete walls and a cold, sterile atmosphere. He was strapped to a chair, his wrists and ankles bound tightly with zip ties. Panic surged through him as he struggled against his restraints, but it was no use. The bonds were too tight. His heart pounded in his chest as he took in his surroundings. The basement was meticulously organized, with shelves lined with various tools and equipment. It was clear that the Voss family had done this before. Gideon stood in front of him, holding a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Serafina and the children watched from the shadows, their expressions cold and detached. Gideon's friendly facade had vanished, replaced by a look of malevolent glee. "Good evening, Felix," Gideon said, his voice calm and composed. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, but you've been chosen." Felix's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. "Chosen? For what? Please, let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Gideon chuckled, shaking his head. "It's too late for that, Felix. You see, my family and I have certain hobbies. We find people like you on the dark web, desperate and unsuspecting. It's thrilling, really." Serafina stepped forward, her eyes devoid of empathy. "We need you to understand, Felix. This isn't personal. It's just what we do." Ophelia and Damien remained silent, their faces expressionless. Felix could see a glimmer of something in Ophelia's eyes. Hesitation, perhaps? But it was quickly overshadowed by her resolve. Gideon approached Felix with the syringe, and Felix's heart pounded even harder. "This will help numb the pain," Gideon said, injecting the liquid into Felix's arm. A wave of coldness spread through Felix's body, and he felt his muscles relax against his will. His mind remained alert, but his body was rendered almost immobile. As the drug took effect, Gideon began to speak, his voice calm and composed. "You see, Felix, you're not the first to find yourself in this predicament. We've had quite a few guests down here over the years. Each one of them has provided us with a unique form of entertainment." Serafina walked over to a nearby shelf, selecting a small, sharp scalpel. "We've developed a bit of a routine," she said, her voice carrying a chilling nonchalance. "We like to start with the basics, cuts and burns, just to get a feel for how much pain our guest can tolerate." Damien, the youngest, picked up a cattle prod, his face alight with anticipation. "Remember the guy from last year?" he asked, turning to his father. "The one who thought he could outsmart us. We used this on him. He screamed for hours." Gideon nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ah, yes, that was a memorable one. We learned a lot from him. It's amazing how the human body reacts to different stimuli." Felix's heart pounded in his chest as he listened to them discuss their previous victims. The family's casual tone and detached manner made it clear that they had done this many times before. The realization that he was just another pawn in their sick game filled him with a sense of hopelessness. Ophelia, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "We usually escalate from there," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "We have a collection of tools that we use to experiment. It's fascinating to see how the body responds to different forms of trauma." Gideon motioned to a large wooden chest in the corner of the room. "Shall we show him some of our favorites?" he suggested, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Serafina opened the chest, revealing an array of instruments, each more terrifying than the last. Gideon picked up a pair of rusty pliers. "These," he said, holding them up for Felix to see, "are excellent for removing fingernails." We had one guest who managed to hold out until the third nail. Impressive, really. Serafina selected a branding iron, its tip shaped like a serpent. "This is always a crowd favorite," she said, heating the iron with a portable torch. "The smell of burning flesh is something you never forget." Felix's mind raced as he took in the horrifying array of tools. His thoughts were interrupted by Damien, who approached with a set of needles. "I like to use these to pierce the skin in sensitive areas," he said, his voice filled with a disturbing enthusiasm. "It's amazing how much pain a tiny needle can cause when placed just right." As the family continued to discuss their methods, Ophelia's discomfort became more apparent. She stood slightly apart from the others, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and doubt. Despite her hesitation, she joined in the conversation, detailing some of the psychological torture they had inflicted on past victims. "We had one guest who was particularly resilient," Ophelia said softly. "We kept him down here for days, depriving him of sleep and food. We made him watch as we tortured others. By the end, he was begging us to end his suffering." Gideon nodded approvingly. "Yes, that was a particularly effective method. Psychological torture can be just as powerful as physical pain." Felix's terror grew with each passing moment as the family continued to describe their heinous acts. They spoke of waterboarding, electrocution, and even more gruesome methods that left Felix feeling sick to his stomach. The basement was filled with the echoes of their voices, each word a reminder of the horrors that awaited him. Serafina turned to Felix, her eyes cold and devoid of empathy. "We have something special planned for you, Felix," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "You see, each victim teaches us something new. With you, we want to push the boundaries even further." Gideon stepped closer, his face inches from Felix's. "We're going to start with the usual methods," he said, his voice a low whisper. "But then we're going to experiment. We have some new tools we've been eager to try. You're going to help us perfect our techniques." Felix's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of his situation sank in. He was at the mercy of a family who viewed torture as a form of entertainment, a twisted hobby that brought them closer together. The numbing agent coursed through his veins, leaving him powerless to fight back as they prepared to begin their gruesome ritual. Gideon and Seraphina approached with their chosen tools, their faces alight with anticipation. Damien watched eagerly, and even Ophelia, despite her evident discomfort, took her place beside her family. The Voss family was ready to begin their dark fun, and Felix was about to become their latest victim. The basement was deathly quiet as the Voss family prepared to start their twisted ritual. Felix's breaths came in shallow, panicked gasps, the realization of what was to come sinking in with each passing second. Gideon, with a surgeon's precision, began the torment. Gideon's rusty pliers gleamed under the harsh basement light as he approached Felix. "Let's start with something simple," he said, gripping Felix's index finger. He pried the nail from its bed with slow, deliberate movements. The pain was excruciating, and Felix's scream echoed off the concrete walls. The sound seemed to invigorate the family, confirming that their chosen victim could indeed provide the entertainment they sought. Seraphina, with the branding iron now glowing red-hot, moved in next. The serpent's head sizzled as it made contact with Felix's flesh, leaving a charred, smoking brand. The smell of burning skin filled the room, causing Felix to retch. Seraphina watched him intently, her eyes studying the pain etched across his face. "Beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. Damien, eager to participate, selected a needle from his collection. He slid it under Felix's toenail, pressing down with a sadistic smile. Felix's body convulsed in agony, the restraints digging into his skin as he tried to writhe away from the pain. "Just like that," Damien murmured, lost in his own world of cruelty. Gideon set aside the pliers and retrieved a scalpel from the chest. He made shallow cuts along Felix's arms and legs, each slice meticulously placed to maximize pain while minimizing blood loss. "We need you conscious for as long as possible," Gideon explained, almost as if teaching a class. "The more you endure, the more we learn." Ophelia stood back, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. She watched her family inflict horror upon Felix, her own hands trembling slightly. She glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, Ophelia picked up a small, serrated knife and approached Felix. She began to carve intricate patterns into his flesh, each cut adding to the grotesque tapestry of his suffering. "We've learned a lot over the years," Ophelia said softly, her voice barely audible. "Each victim is different. Some break quickly, while others hold on for days. It's fascinating to see how the mind and body respond to pain." Gideon interrupted her musings, gesturing towards a rack of syringes. "Shall we try the serum?" he suggested. "It's a new concoction I've been working on. It heightens sensitivity to pain." Seraphina nodded eagerly, grabbing a syringe filled with a viscous, amber-colored liquid. She injected it into Felix's arm, the fluid burning as it entered his bloodstream. Almost immediately, every nerve in Felix's body felt like it was on fire. The slightest touch sent waves of agony crashing through him. Felix's vision blurred, tears streaming down his face as he endured the relentless torment. He felt his consciousness slipping, the pain threatening to pull him under. But the Voss family wasn't finished yet. Damien picked up the cattle prod, its tip sparking ominously. "This is always a good test," he said, pressing it against Felix's side. The electric shock sent Felix into violent convulsions, his muscles seizing uncontrollably. As Felix's body spasmed, Gideon leaned in close, whispering in his ear, "You're strong, Felix. Stronger than most. This is good. We need to push you further, to the edge." Serafina moved around to Felix's other side, her branding iron cooling but still hot enough to cause searing pain. She pressed it into his thigh, the flesh bubbling and charring. Felix's scream was raw and primal, a sound born of pure, unadulterated agony. Through the haze of pain, Felix noticed Ophelia's expression shifting. She seemed to waver, her hands shaking more visibly now. She stepped back, her face pale. "I can't do this," she muttered, her voice barely audible over Felix's cries. "This is wrong." Gideon's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "We've talked about this, Ophelia. You know the rules. We're a family. We do this together." Ophelia's gaze darted to Felix, then back to her father. "I can't," she repeated, dropping the knife. "This isn't right." For a moment, the basement fell silent, the tension palpable. Serafina and Damien exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. Gideon's expression hardened, his grip tightening on the scalpel. "Ophelia, you're disappointing us. We've come so far. Don't back out now." But Ophelia couldn't be swayed. She stepped away from Felix, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking at Felix with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. Gideon's anger boiled over. "Fine," he spat. "We'll continue without you. But remember, this is your family. You can't escape who you are." As Ophelia retreated to the corner of the room, Felix's torment continued. Gideon, Serafina, and Damien resumed their twisted ritual, their methods growing increasingly brutal. Felix's screams filled the basement. Hours passed, each one a blur of unimaginable pain. Felix's mind teetered on the brink of madness, his body a canvas of cuts, burns, and bruises. The serum's effects heightened every sensation, turning even the slightest touch into a torrent of agony. In a moment of desperation, Felix's survival instincts kicked in. He began to focus on the binds around his wrists, feeling for any give in the rope. As the family grew more engrossed in their work, Felix tugged at the restraints, his movements subtle and careful. Finally, in a rare moment of chaos, when Damien knocked over a tray of instruments, Felix saw his chance. He wrenched his wrist free, the rope loosening just enough for him to slip his hand out. His heart pounded in his chest as he quietly worked on the other wrist, all while the family's attention was diverted. Ophelia noticed Felix's struggle, but said nothing, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. She took a step forward, then hesitated, unsure of what to do. Felix, sensing her internal conflict, met her gaze. "Help me," he mouthed silently, his eyes pleading. In that moment, Ophelia made her decision. She moved quickly, distracting her family under the guise of fetching more tools. As she did, Felix managed to free his other hand. With his wrists free, he worked on the ropes around his ankles, his movements quick and desperate. Just as Gideon turned back to Felix, ready to continue, Felix sprang from the chair. He grabbed the nearest tool, a heavy wrench, and swung it with all his strength. The wrench connected with Gideon's head, sending him sprawling to the ground. Chaos erupted as Felix fought for his life. Serafina screamed, lunging at Felix with the scalpel, but he managed to dodge her attack. Damien, shocked and enraged, reached for the cattle prod, but Felix was faster. He grabbed the prod and jabbed it into Damien's side, the electric shock sending him crashing to the floor. Ophelia stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. Felix, bloodied and battered, looked at her. "Run," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "Get out of here." As Felix stumbled towards the basement stairs, he could hear the distant sound of sirens. The neighbors, alerted by the commotion, had called the police. With every ounce of strength he had left, Felix climbed the stairs, his body screaming in protest. The basement door burst open just as the police arrived. Felix, covered in blood and barely able to stand, collapsed into the arms of the officers. The Voss family's dark secret was exposed, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of their crimes. Gideon, Serafina, and Damien were arrested, their faces a mix of shock and fury. Ophelia, tears streaming down her face, was taken into custody, her mind reeling from the events that had unfolded. As Felix was taken to the hospital, the horror of his ordeal began to sink in. He had survived the unimaginable, escaping the clutches of a family that had turned torture into a twisted form of entertainment. The Voss family's dark fun had come to an end, their legacy of pain and suffering exposed for all to see. As Felix lay in the hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with the soft hum of medical equipment, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over him. The nightmare he had endured in the Voss family's basement felt like a distant, grotesque dream. The crisp, clean sheets and the gentle murmurs of the nurses were a stark contrast to the horrors he had faced. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Felix felt safe. The torment and agony were behind him, and though the scars would remain, both seen and unseen, he was free. Tears of gratitude streamed down his face as he realized he had escaped the clutches of a sadistic family, finding solace in the care and compassion of those around him. In the bright, sterile light of the hospital, Felix began to believe that he could heal and reclaim his life from the darkness that had tried to consume him. He would take back his life, one step at a time, one fingernail at a time. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary stories. Until next time.